Freaky enemies? Check. Scary boss fights? Check. Eerie environments? Check. Mr. X? Oh wait, where you go? Credited as the father of survival horror video games, the Resident Evil series is packed with more scares and unexpected turns than most franchises out there that share the same genre. With the recent release of Resident Evil 4 Remake, and with Resident Evil 9 hopefully being announced in the near future, now is the time to reflect on the nearly 30-year-old franchise and rank some of the game's scariest moments one game at a time. For this ranking, we are going to be mainly looking at the mainline entries and some spin-off titles in the Resident Evil franchise. This consists of all numbered Resident Evil titles, in addition to games like Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil Code Veronica, as well as both Resident Evil Revelations 1 and Revelations 2. And yeah, we are also going to be covering the various remakes as well. Due to the sheer amount of Resident Evil titles in this ranking, I am first going to choose what I believe to be the scariest moment in each of these games, and rank each of these moments against the rest until we reach the absolute scariest moment in all of Resident Evil. And just remember, my pick of the scariest moment may not represent what I feel is the scariest game in the series. No. That will be a ranking better saved for another video. Just know that this video will be chock full of spoilers, so as many of these scary moments relate to certain encounters and bosses throughout the series. Before we go in, what we perceive as scary differs from person to person, so if you have a different list or want to share what you feel are the scariest moments in each Resident Evil game, of course, drop a comment below.
Oh my god!
To start this list off, we are going to take a look at Resident Evil 0. I have to say, I didn't find RE0 to have many noteworthy scary moments that really jumped out at me, other than these freaking hunters here in the underground bunker. More frightening and also proving to be a good nuisance, these hunter-infested corridors in the underground bunker are probably the closest thing to being scary in Resident Evil 0. Always jumping at the chance to ambush and corner the player, this area certainly packed a few effective scares. I haven't played the game in a little over a decade, so for those who have played it more recently, what do you think is the scariest moment in Resident Evil 0? Let me know in the comments. Revelations 2 is another great Resident Evil game that doesn't get a lot of attention. While to me there aren't many standout moments that are truly scary, the game's tense atmosphere is in prime display throughout the game. I think the encounters with the Revenant enemy type are quite memorable, as they are quite formidable. Speedy when they need to close the distance and eager to pulverize the player with their grabs, these disgusting, severely mutated humans from the T-Phobos virus are perhaps the enemies that stand out most against all others in Revelations 2. They are more freaky to look at than any other enemy type in the game, and combine that with the thick atmosphere of Revelations 2, and you have the recipe for some proper fears in this unique Resident Evil title. Resident Evil 5 gets a lot of love and hate for varying reasons, and while I won't get into that here, we can all agree that it is perhaps the Resident Evil game with the least number of scares. Because of that, I had a hard time picking a scary moment here, although some can certainly be frightening. I decided to go with the marshlands in Chapter 3, where tons of these menacing crocodiles swim about who are all too intent in devouring you with their massive, powerful jaws. These creatures, just like in real life, use their natural camouflage to blend right into the murky waters they inhabit, so it can definitely be quite surprising to see these creatures suddenly close in on you while navigating through these marshlands. It's the unexpected nature of their attacks that makes me put these crikeys over the previous entries. It all started in 1996, when players were introduced to the Spencer Mansion in the very first Resident Evil. While this game is considered the father of the survival horror genre and was indeed a scary game back in the day, some of the scares present in the original Resident Evil game don't scare quite as hard now as they used to. Many Resident Evil fans remember the dog jump scare as being one of the most alarming moments of the very first game, and while I agree that it was certainly a startling moment, I believe the introduction of the hunters is certainly more frightening. Not only are these beasts much more challenging to take down than the dogs, but it instilled a sense of dread in the player, letting us know that, well, now that we've returned to the mansion after clearing the guardhouse, that we now have an unknown number of these hunters just lurking around, ready to come clawing at us at any given moment. It's like playing Subnautica and just knowing that there are all manner of Reaper Leviathans out there, just waiting to sink their menacing mandibles into your flesh. The Spencer Mansion was something entirely different, with these hunters roaming about. While I loved the dynamic camera system introduced to Code Veronica back in the day, I ultimately found the game to be light on the scares, especially coming after Resident Evil 2 and 3 before it. That said, the torture room on Rockford Island had great atmosphere and a creepy soundtrack accompanying it, but I think the boss fight, Nosferatu, is the scariest moment in the game. While not entirely horrifying, the blizzard-like conditions in which we fight the boss with the limited visibility certainly aids to the atmosphere. There's nothing like looking down the scope of your rifle and seeing this menace staring you down. Its constant poison attacks and Claire's constant shrieking do dampen an otherwise tense fight, but a remake of this game could absolutely make this encounter all the spookier. Moving on to the divisive Resident Evil 6, RE6 is a massive game, featuring a handful of campaigns sporting classic Resident Evil characters. There really is a lot going on here, but maybe not so much in the scare department. While I feel like Leon's campaign does a pretty good job in offering some of the traditional scares found throughout the franchise, I found that the serpent boss fight, Lucija, does a pretty good job at creating tension throughout the fight. Its appearances are startling, and its disturbing hissing sounds that it emits excellently embellish the encounter and make it easily the most enjoyable encounter in the game. With so many over-the-top, grotesque bosses and enemies due to the C virus, this boss encounter kinda goes back to the basics with its design and flow, and that is something I definitely appreciate about it. True to the original game that it remakes, Resident Evil 3 Remake is an action blockbuster, showcasing the power of Nemesis as we navigate Jill Valentine through the streets of Raccoon City, spiraling out of control. Although I very much enjoyed the original game over the remake, the gameplay is quite good here, and the game's scariest moments to me came as a surprise. I went into this remake thinking moments regarding Nemesis and his appearances were going to be the scariest parts of the game, but I was proven wrong when wandering the eerie, blood-soaked halls of the hospital with Carlos. There isn't one particular moment that jumps out, but I'll narrow it down to the hunter encounters in the hospital. There are many of these monsters just roaming around the deserted hospital, and having them charge at you in the dimly lit corridors is atmospheric and spooky as hell. I really like what Capcom did with this hospital section in an otherwise very contested Resident Evil game, and for me, this section alone is the brightest moment in all of Resident Evil 3 Remake. The OG Resident Evil 4 is still one heck of a good time. Back then, the new perspective from the fixed camera angles to the over-the-shoulder perspective actually made a lot of the game feel scarier and more threatening than some of the older games in the series. That's just me speaking. I'll never forget being introduced to Dr. Salvador for the first time in the village, but perhaps the most haunting part of the entire game was towards the end in the action-heavy island section where we got introduced to the regenerators. Getting the key card in a nearby lab just to hear the abnormal, harsh breathing kick in with that eerie soundtrack was sure to shock players to the core. And if we weren't shocked and thought just taking the heads off with our fully upgraded riot gun was the best course of action, then what followed after that was sure to make us all go, "What the f***?" and book it out of there. Sporting Plagas parasites writhing within their bodies, it was difficult to know exactly where to shoot until we obtained the infrared scope, allowing the player to see exactly where these parasites resided to end these abominations for good. This whole lab section with the regenerators was just brilliantly done in the original and in the remake, and is easily one of the most haunting first encounters of any enemy type in Resident Evil's long history. The OG RE2 is still such a fantastic game, with a soundtrack, setting, and atmosphere, but the single most startling and terrifying moment in that game has to be this freaking load screen. Who would have thought a load screen could provide such horror? True to classic Resident Evil, the door sequences are a brief respite to catch one's breath or to ponder the next course of action. Well, not with this one, fellas. Not only are we met with 2 zombies coming right at us, but we also get the combat music kicking in at full force. It is all just so freaking abrupt and startling that really comes out of nowhere, sending players the message that we can never truly be safe at the Raccoon City Police Department. Resident Evil Revelations is a fantastic game in a creepy setting. A cruise ship infested with oozing zombies sounds like the perfect vacation, as this game first proved that over-the-shoulder gameplay can absolutely be done in cramped, narrow hallways. The encounter and the scenes with Rachel Foley as she succumbs to the T-Abyss virus are especially haunting, showing up and attacking Jill and Parker numerous times throughout the length of the game. Many of her appearances are unexpected, and fighting her in the cramped, dimly lit corridors of the cruise ship made these encounters all the creepier. The way she twitches and charges at you, screaming, is certainly not the sight you want to see, especially when it involves witnessing a former agent spiral into madness and turn hostile. Revelations is a fantastic entry in the Resident Evil franchise, and its spooky atmosphere and enemy design make this game stand out uniquely against many of the other titles.
I won't run.
While the regenerators are creepy and really well done in the remake, something has to be said about Ashley's section in Resident Evil 4 Remake. This to me is easily the most haunting section of the game, as we had to navigate a defenseless Ashley through an eerie labyrinthine library to find an item to escape, all while these clanking armaduras clash in front of, and more often behind us, as we simply try running away. Our only solace is in our lantern, with its emanating blue light able to temporarily cause these hulking metallic menaces to freeze in place. But it's when we are unable to retrieve our lantern when the true fear sets in. Planning Ashley's escape as we have her weave around a half-dozen armaduras, hell-bent on taking her down, was certainly adrenaline-inducing the first time around, and really shines as one of the most memorable moments in a game punctuated with incredible moments around every corner. Oh, the nostalgia. Another visit back to the Spencer Mansion and its surrounding areas, and an excellent one at that in Resident Evil 1 Remake. Not only are the graphics prettier and the controls a bit more intuitive, but the scares just stand out a bit more here. Something unique to the remake are 2 of my favorite new additions, the Crimson Heads and Lisa Trevor. And it is in the latter, with Lisa's slumbering, disfigured body hunting you down in her cabin in the woods, that makes this poor Umbrella test subject the scariest figure in this game. Just hearing her moans and the clashing of chains from her shackles is enough to send a sweat down your spine. You know she's there, perhaps around the corner or further off in the distance, just itching to get her hands on you like the many people she killed as a result of her torture from Umbrella, wearing the faces of her victims as a mask to hide her grotesque figure. As soon as you hear her moans and chains, get the f out of there. You don't want to have her in the Spencer Mansion. Trust me on that. This fantastic remake of the legendary Resident Evil 2 does so many things right. It appropriately translates all the tension and horror from the claustrophobic corridors of Resident Evil 2 into an over-the-shoulder format, making the zombies more formidable and threatening, while its lighting and atmosphere respectfully captures the haunting locations of the RCPD, sewers, and labs. While the freaking liquor in the interrogation room got me just as bad as it did in the original, the increased frequency of the tyrant Mr. X stalking you through the cramped corridors of the RCPD are the standout moments here. Trying to be quiet, skirting by liquors while hearing the ever louder thumps of Mr. X as he lunges towards you trying to capture you is absolutely chilling in the best way possible. The sound work in this game is just masterclass, and it especially shines when Mr. X is heard wandering the halls above or below us as we plan out our course of action to get from point A to point B. He's not as dangerous as you think when he gets a hold of you, but similar to the hunters in Resident Evil 1, you know Mr. X is out there, roaming the halls to hunt you down to the bitter end. We made it to the top 3. The action-heavy and fun-as-hell companion piece to Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3's scariest moments revolve around the game's menace of a tyrant, Nemesis. Tasked to hunt down Jill as we navigate the chaotic streets of Raccoon City, the game's scariest moments come at a time when Jill finds herself at the RCPD walking down the stairs from the second floor to the first floor of the West Wing. It is completely silent, with only the ambiance of the stormy night faintly heard beyond the RCPD's walls, and of course, Jill's footsteps, until suddenly everything gets turned to 11 when Nemesis violently enters through the window at the foot of the stairs. This moment was so unexpected, and me being in elementary school when I first played this had me nearly crush my controller, sent me faster than I thought Jill could run to the safe room next door. This is why we can thank adrenaline, folks. It comes in real handy, like at this point here. This is easily the scariest jump scare for me in all of Resident Evil, and triumphantly stands as one of the most terrifying moments in all of gaming. Resident Evil 7 is the return to horror that many of us wanted, but didn't know we wanted just like this. There are so many moments here, like Jack Baker stalking you around his estate, encountering Marguerite, etc. But one stands out scarier than all the rest, and it has to be getting the arm to create the serum. Here, we make our way to the old house for the arm. Well, upon getting the arm, you see the figure of a little girl just standing there, waiting for you. It's these appearances, mixed with traversing a cluttered, terrifying maze of junk with this eerie music playing in the background, hinting at something ominous to happen at just about any moment. And shit goes down. While trying to make our way out of the attic, the mold hunt you down, and there are a lot of them. It's so dark as it is that it just makes everything all the scarier. Play this in VR via PSVR 1 and you're in for easily one of the most horrifying moments in all of Resident Evil, hands down. Who knew that the game that came after it was going to follow this up with something even more nightmarish? Yep, many of us probably saw this one coming, but the scariest moment in all of Resident Evil goes to Resident Evil Village's House Beneviento. The baby. Oh baby! Wandering around a creep house with seemingly nothing of particular interest, we reach this ominous elevator in a hallway. You notice the wallpaper peeling in this hallway and an elevator just standing there, so you decide the best thing is to see where this bad boy leads us, right? Well, upon arriving at what some may claim to be their final destination, we realize that this basement is all an extravagant setup. A game, if you will, of solving cryptic puzzles in a room escape-like fashion set to Ethan's past and his relationship with Mia. That bed there in the corner, why can we crawl under it? This locker here, why can we hide in it? Because there's something lurking deep within the haunted hallways of House Beneviento, that's why. Capcom nailed this sequence better than any single horror sequence done in any other Resident Evil game. Walking down the stairs to the well, listening to a baby crying as its cries echo all throughout utter blackness. Retrieving the final piece to the puzzle, we hear a violent thud. Something is clearly not right. We make our way back towards the elevator that got us into this mess, and then out of the corner of the hallway, a massive fetus with a mouth as wide as a half-dozen toilet bowls comes charging at you, laughing and squirming awkwardly as it tries to swallow you whole. But that's not it. We need to find the fuse to power the elevator, but where did it go? We keep up the whole concept of the room escape while being hunted by this monstrosity. Hiding in lockers, hiding under a bed, coming mere inches away from this death baby, literally staring your greatest fears in the face as you ponder how to get the hell out of there. It is an incredible adrenaline rush, both of excitement but mostly fear as you experience one of the best sequences in all of horror. Experiencing this in VR is absolutely a love letter to your adrenal glands, and if you have the means of experiencing it, don't miss out on it. There are freaky moments permeated throughout Resident Evil, but none have been done with such precision as this, making the baby sequence of Resident Evil Village's House Beneviento the scariest moment in all of Resident Evil. So there you have it, my list of Resident Evil's scariest moments. Let me know what your list is in the comments below and whether you disagree with some of my entries. Again, we all experience fear differently, so I'd love to hear your thoughts about it all in the comments. Make sure to watch this video going over the deadliest viruses and infections in all of Resident Evil, and stay tuned to the channel for even more Resident Evil content coming up. Thank you all for the awesome support, and I'll see you real soon in the next one.